Hi guys, today we are going to be talking about cellular respiration. So earlier in the unit we talked about photosynthesis, and this is really the beginning of energy conversion for humans and animals and plants alike. Now we're specifically going to talk about how animals convert the energy that was created in photosynthesis for us into a usable type of energy. So that's what we're going to talk about in cellular respiration. So why is cellular respiration important? So what happens to the energy that is stored in glucose during photosynthesis? So what do we do, plants and animals alike, do with that energy that has been converted in photosynthesis? So one misconception that people might think is that animals only, or that plants only go through photosynthesis. In fact, they're also going through cellular respiration. So once they create that energy, or I shouldn't say create, once they convert that energy into glucose, they then are going to go through cellular respiration. So, and that process again is going to convert that chemical energy into a usable energy that we can use, which is called ATP. So you've probably heard that term before when we talked about photosynthesis. It was that school bus we talked about that's going to carry that carry that phosphate. And when it carries that phosphate, it stores energy in the bond. And when the bond is broken, it releases that energy. And this will make more sense as we go through cellular respiration. All right, so respiration can be two things. It can be aerobic or anaerobic. So I'm sure you guys have all heard the term aerobic before when we're talking about exercise, as well as anaerobic. So aerobic respiration means that oxygen is present, okay? It's going to be completed inside of the mitochondria, and it produces significantly more ATP, okay, or more energy for us to use. Anaerobic respiration, on the other hand, is when respiration is not using oxygen. It's completed in the cytoplasm, and it produces significantly less ATP. So eukaryotic cells are able to go through aerobic and anaerobic respiration, whereas prokaryotic cells like bacteria are only able to go through anaerobic. So you have seen this formula before, but you've seen it in a reverse direction, so in photosynthesis. So now we're taking the products, okay, and we're kind of reversing it to the reactants. So what we end up with in photosynthesis is what we start off with in respiration. So we have C6H12O6, which is glucose, and oxygen. We go through that process of cellular respiration, and we end up with carbon dioxide, water, and ATP, which is a form of energy. So this is going to be reversed in photosynthesis. So we start with water and carbon dioxide. When we start with photosynthesis, our energy is from the sun. So again, it's going to be reversed. So the reverse reaction is photosynthesis. This is kind of good to remember too. So for every one molecule of cellular respiration, approximately 36 ATP are produced. You're going to see, sometimes you'll see 38, but really you're kind of see this 36. It's going to be an average. So where does this take place? Well, it's going to take place in the mitochondria. So when we talked about the cell, we kind of gave the mitochondria the powerhouse or the factory, the energy producer. And that's because it takes that energy from glucose and converts it into ATP, which is our energy currency, what we can use. So it takes in glucose. You're also going to see other organic molecules. So proteins, lipids, these are all things that also can be converted into ATP. So the process occurs in the mitochondria. And what are our products? So we have heat, which is going to be released as energy, carbon dioxide, ATP, which is our energy currency that we are going to use, and then water. A few things to remember. So energy is going to be stored in these molecules, and you've seen these in photosynthesis. So NADH, FADH2, and ATP. So they are going to store energy in their bonds, okay? And when we break those bonds, it's an exothermic reaction and energy is going to be released. So this is going to talk about that conversion between ATP and ADP. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphates, or 3-phosphates, okay? And if we break this bond between this phosphate, energy is going to be released, and we end up with ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, and then we kind of have this phosphate right here. Now, if we were to then bond this phosphate back here, we would be storing energy, okay? And that would be an endothermic reaction. So there's 3 stages of cellular respiration in the presence of oxygen. So the first one is going to be glycolysis. Now this is going to occur in the cytoplasm. It does not require oxygen. So glycolysis can actually also happen in anaerobic respiration, and it does, because it does not require oxygen. But it is still the first step in the aerobic pathway. So it's going to occur in the cytoplasm, and this process is when we break glucose, okay? So we're splitting glucose. So that's what this term means. We're slicing, or we're breaking apart glucose. We then enter into the Krebs cycle. It's going to occur in the mitochondria in the presence of oxygen. And since it occurs in the mitochondria, we know that only eukaryotic cells are able to carry out the Krebs cycle. The carbon that was in glucose is released as CO2, so that's a byproduct, a waste product that leaves the cell. High energy electrons are produced, and that energy is then going to be stored in NADH and FADH, okay? So we talked about those as being energy stores, kind of those buses that are going to transfer the energy to the next part of the pathway. And the next part of the pathway is going to be the electron transport chain. Sometimes you'll see it summarized or kind of abbreviated as the ETC. Again, this occurs in the mitochondria. It requires oxygen. And this is where we get most of our ATP produced. So this is where we're going to see that significant energy conversion happening. So here's a picture of kind of what's going on, the overall process of cellular respiration. I really like looking at images like this because I think the understanding's there. Sometimes when you see words, you're not really understanding what's going on, but when you can kind of see a picture, it makes a little bit of sense. So what's going in? Well, we need oxygen and glucose. So glucose is going to come in here. We're going to split the glucose in half. Then when we release that energy, they're going to be stored in NADH, okay? One of the products of glycolysis is also going to be pyruvic acid. You might also see pyruvate. They're interchangeable, so don't be confused by that. So what is next? The Krebs cycle. So those pyruvic acids or pyruvates then enter into the Krebs cycle, okay? It's going to break down further. We have the electrons. We then need to be that bus to carry the energy into the electron transport chain, and then we get ATP out, okay? You're also having electrons carried in NADH from glycolysis as well. So we get energy out of glycolysis, we're getting converted energy out of the Krebs cycle, and we're also getting converted energy out of the ETC. This little orange thing represents the mitochondria. So Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, both occur in the mitochondria. Glycolysis is going to occur in the cytoplasm. All right, so let's specifically talk about each step. We already talked about it a little bit, but now we're going to get into more numbers. So glycolysis literally means breaking down glucose. It occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell. Now, when we break down glucose, it's going to create 2 molecules of pyruvic acid. Again, you might see pyruvate, okay, interchangeable. So the cell is going to invest some energy for this process to happen. So it's going to basically spend 2 ATP molecules. But what does it get out? It's going to get out 4 ATP, and 2 NADH molecules. So overall, we net 2 ATP molecules. So even though we had to spend 2, we create 4, and that means our net or our overall conversion of ATP is going to be 2. So this is kind of a cool picture. So you can see glucose is going to go in. What do we get out? Well, we get out our 2 ATP, our 2 NADH, and our pyruvates. So here you can see it again. So again, glucose is a 6-carbon sugar. We need to spend 2 ATP in order to break down that glucose. But out of that process, we're going to get 4, or a net of 2. And we also get 2 NADH molecules. So those high energy electrons are going to be stored in here as an NADH. Then we have our pyruvic acid that will then go into the Krebs cycle. All right, so the mitochondria. So again, glycolysis is going to occur in the cytoplasm. Now we're entering into the mitochondria. So that's where we see the Krebs in the electron transport chain. Cells that are going to use a lot of energy, they need a lot of energy conversion centers. So something, for example, muscle cells, whether it's in your heart or your bicep, we need a lot of energy being converted. And so the number of mitochondria in these cells are going to be greater than that of a cell that doesn't need the energy. You can kind of see it's the double membrane. So you're going to have the outer membrane and the inner membrane. This is going to be the matrix of the mitochondria, and these folds are the cristae. All right, so now we're going into specifics of the aerobic part of respiration. So again, oxygen needs to be present for the Krebs cycle to happen. It's going to occur in that matrix, or that middle part of the mitochondria. So what's happening? So pyruvic acid is going to enter the Krebs cycle to form 2 ATPs, NADH, FADH, and CO2. So what goes in and what comes out? So those pyruvic acids are coming in, and what's coming out? 2 ATPs and NADH. Again, these are going to carry or store energy that's been converted. FADH, again, that energy storer, and then CO2. So CO2 is a waste product, and it's going to leave the cell. So again, what comes in and what comes out, okay? So you have the pyruvates coming in. What's going to come out? CO2, ATP, FADH2, and those NADH molecules. You do not have to worry about the numbers of these. The ATP, sometimes you'll be asked that, but these molecules of carbon dioxide or NADH or FADH2s, you don't have to know specifics of that. All right, so now we enter into the last part of cellular respiration, and that's going to be the electron transport chain. So what happens, or what's entering into the ETC? So we have that NADH and the FADH, okay, that we got from our Krebs cycle. Where does this occur? It's going to occur in the folds of the membrane, okay, the cristae. Electrons are passed down a chain of proteins. So you can kind of see this picture. This is a really complex concept, and we're just going to touch on the very basics. But what happens is this electron is going to be passed down a chain of proteins until it reaches oxygen as the final electron acceptor. So these were also electron acceptors. They were storing that energy, but oxygen is going to be our final electron. And so the electron transport chain is going to produce 32 ATP. So we're getting a significant amount of ATP, where we only saw 2 and 2 from glycolysis and Krebs cycle. And then we're also going to have water as a final product of cellular respiration as well. So this is a really cool thing. It kind of makes a little bit more sense as to how the electron transport chain works in a way that you can understand it. So if you've taken any sort of physical science, you know there's the difference between kind of potential energy and then kinetic energy. When you have kinetic, it's the energy of motion, okay? So up here we have potential energy, and as it bounces down, we're kind of losing that energy. So we go from high to low energy. Well, where does that energy go? Well, it's going to be stored in the molecule of ATP. So you can kind of think we have our potential energy, and then once we start moving, okay, we go from a high energy state to a low energy state, and that energy is released and it's stored in those ATP molecules. All right, so let's do a little flow chart. So what's happening? So we're going to start with glucose and oxygen. The first step of aerobic respiration is going to be glycolysis. We're going to get 2 ATP. We enter into Krebs. We're going to get 2 ATP. And then we enter into electron transport chain where we get 32 ATP. And then our final products of cellular respiration are going to be carbon dioxide and water, which are going to be the reactants in photosynthesis. So it's important to acknowledge or remember that photosynthesis and cellular respiration are reliant on each other. So what happens if no oxygen is available? So then we're going to bypass that Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. It's not going to function. So what happens now? Well, we go into a process called fermentation. So if, in fact, there is not any oxygen available, it will go through glycolysis and then into fermentation. So again, if no oxygen is present after glycolysis, it will go into fermentation, and our products are much different. So it occurs in the cytoplasm. So prokaryotes are able to go through fermentation. Again, it's going to convert NADH from glycolysis back into NAD. So it's going to produce a small amount of energy. So remember, if we break this hydrogen off right here, it's an exothermic reaction and it's going to release some energy. So it's a small amount, but it still is a conversion of energy. So there's 2 types of fermentation. The first one is going to be alcoholic fermentation. So yeasts are going to use this process to form ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide as waste products. So this is going to cause bread dough to rise, and it's also how some alcoholic beverages are made. So you can see the reaction down here. So we have the pyruvic acid, which we get from glycolysis, and NADH, and our products are going to be alcohol, carbon dioxide, and then that energy or that electron acceptor. Then we have lactic acid fermentation. So this is going to occur in bacteria. So this is how cheese, yogurt, and pickles are made. And it also can occur in muscles during rapid exercise. So when your body is not allowing your cells to go through aerobic respiration, it will go through lactic acid fermentation. So this is when you get that muscle soreness or burning after the intense activity. That's from lactic acid. So we have our pyruvic acid, which we've gotten from glycolysis. We have our energy store, NADH. It's going to go through fermentation, and our products are going to be lactic acid and NAD. This is kind of showing you what happens. So we go through glycolysis, we create those, or we get those pyruvates, and then these are specific types of organisms and what they create. So we see soy sauce, cheese and yogurt. These are both lactic acid fermentation. And then we have alcoholic fermentations. You can see beer, wine, and bread. Those are all going to be made through fermentation. Here's kind of a flow chart that will show you. So we have anaerobic respiration. Remember, no oxygen is going to be present. So we still go through glycolysis in the cytoplasm. 2 types of fermentation. So we're going to have alcoholic or lactic acid, again, occurs in the cytoplasm. And we're going to get 2 ATP molecules for every glucose molecule. Over here, we have aerobic respiration. It's going to require oxygen. Still go through glycolysis, which is going to occur in the cytoplasm. Krebs, electron transport chain, which occur in the mitochondria. and we end up with 36. So we get 2 from glycolysis, 2 from Krebs, and 32 from electron transport chain. Again, here's just another visual. I would print these out. These are really good for you to understand what's going on at each pathway of cellular respiration. So we have glycolysis. We're going to break down glucose, and we end up with the pyruvates, which are going to enter into the Krebs cycle. And then we go into electron transport chain. You do not have to know about oxidative phosphorylation. You will not be tested on it at any point during this class. If you take another biology class, higher level in college, you probably will see that, but not for our standards. You guys don't have to learn those. So here is our reaction, okay, and our products. So we start with glucose and oxygen. We go through cellular respiration, and we end up with carbon dioxide, water, and ATP, which remember is our energy currency, what we need to run our body. All right, and that is it. If you guys need anything, as always, I'm here for you. Just let me know what I can do.